Hi, I'm back. When I worked in the prison systems, I saw a lot of atrocities toward Native American inmates. It was very disturbing. It was difficult to deal with emotionally. I often felt totally helpless to do anything about it. And I often was totally helpless to do anything about it. I could tell you all kinds of horror stories. I remember back when I was only in Texas, down at Beaumont, one of my inmates who was in on such a minor charge, it was ridiculous. He had to have gallbladder surgery, and they took him in, and the next thing he knew, he woke up in his cell, and he had a big cut across his abdomen. And he yelled for a guard, and he said, "Hey, nobody sewed me up. What am I supposed to do?" And the guard said, "Well, I guess you just better hold it together." Didn't have any antibiotics, nothing. Open wound. And so I sent in one of my Texas associates, and I was located in Michigan at the time, to verify what the inmate had told me, and it was true. And they did not stitch him up. He was expected to stay still, hold it together, do whatever. I don't know if they thought it was funny, if they were cutting costs, or what the deal was, but that's just one of many. But the one I want to tell you about today is in Sioux Falls Pen, and this is the one that stopped me in my tracks after years of work. I couldn't do it anymore. Emotionally, I was obliterated by this. But they have these things called reservation roundups. And reservations have to keep a certain number of people on the res, or else it's no longer res, and the land defaults back to the government. So the Native Americans are pretty much trapped there. And what they were doing, and this was back in the 90s, Governor Janklow was in office, and he was a complete ass. Ass doesn't even begin to describe the things that he did. But I don't even know where to go with this. All right, I'd gotten a message from Frank Runningshield, and he told me about George Bluebird, who was a Native man. He shouldn't even be in prison. He had been accused of a burglary and murder of a convenience store person, and this was a long time ago. I'm hoping I get this story right. But it was kind of funny because he was picked up 80 miles away from where the crime had been committed. He has a drinking problem, and by a drinking problem, I don't mean he's an alcoholic. I mean alcohol and he don't get along. He drinks, and sometimes he just blacks right out, passes out. It's kind of a toss-up with him. He doesn't even have to drink a lot for this to happen. It's almost like an allergy of some kind, and not an allergy in the true sense. But he was at a party. There were a lot of people there. And he had a couple of beers, and he decided to leave. And he left the party, and he woke up in custody. What had happened is that he had wandered a couple of blocks away on his way home, and he passed out. Now, this was, like I said, 80 miles away from where this crime was committed. He did not have a vehicle. No violent history. absolutely nothing. But he was not on the reservation. So they charged him with this crime because they do that. They look for, if a Native American is off the reservation, they will look for anything that they can pin on them to put them to load up the prisons, because they're trying to get them off the res. And particularly if they can give them a life sentence without parole, they do that. Or they'll give them lesser charges and come up with ways to keep them in, like saying, oh, he beat up this guard, or, you know, whatever. And they keep them in perpetually. Not only that, but prison's a business. They make money off of it. So, yeah, that's why you end up with a lot of innocent Native American people in prison. But, so I started talking to George Bluebird. And I started sending supplies into the inmates for their ceremonial worship. And they had it a little bit better there as far as being allowed to worship in their traditional ways. It was a matter of getting supplies. And George Bluebird was an exceptional man. I don't know if he's still alive or not. You'll know why at the end of the story, and this may take 2 videos. But even once in prison and wrongfully accused, he would do artwork. He was a fantastic painter, artist, and he would do artwork, and he made a lot of money. His artwork went to galleries, and it sold for quite a bit, and he supported his wife and kids. Even after she remarried, he supported the whole family. But then there was an uprising at the pen, and with good reason, because the inmates were pretty much treated like hell there. They had this thing called the pit, where most people didn't come back. And it was very, very bad circumstances. But he was a wonderful man. And George had a best friend, but he called him his father, Tom Whitehawk, who was in prison with him. And Tom was one of the oldest inmates in there. And he and George forged just an incredible relationship. And he was his father. That's how he talked about him. That's how he referred to him. And they were very, very close over the years. And they did a lot of good for, they even allowed them to help counsel other inmates and things. So, gee, I want to do a little intercession in here just to tell you what this would be like to be wrongfully accused. He had already been in about 20 years when I met him. And one day he called me from the prison. They did have phone privileges at this prison, which is rare. But you could only talk for like 10 minutes because they had to move every 10 minutes. And he called me from the prison, and he was crying. And I said, George, what's wrong? And he said that he had been hurt, but that's not why he was crying. He was sent to the infirmary. And in the infirmary, they had a window. And it had bars on it, but there was a window. And he said, I saw the moon. I saw the moon for the first time in 20 years. And he was describing the moon to me. And it's something I always take for granted. You go outside, you look at the moon, you look at the stars. But for him, it was just the most beautiful thing he had seen in 20 years. I'm sorry, I get very emotional about this, and he was crying, and I was crying with him. But that should give you an idea what it's like to be an inmate who is wrongly accused, who is in prison. And you're Native American, you're just disposable. They don't care. The only reason he wasn't ever thrown into the pit and killed probably was because he did help to make the inmates. He helped counsel them, so he made them easier for the people to deal with. The guards and everybody. But he and Tom Whitehawk used to sit around, and that was back when they allowed them cigarettes. They used to smoke cigarettes and drink coffee, and they came up with an idea. A lot of the younger people didn't know their own language, their native language. They weren't allowed to speak it in the prison. They also didn't know the medicine stories. They didn't know the history of the tribes. And Tom and George were very concerned about this. So they decided to do a newsletter. And they were going to publish, the old stories, the language, just anything that would help the young people back on the res and in the prison to be able to start learning their history and their language. And I thought it was a wonderful idea. It was the kind of thing that George and Tom would come up with. They always wanted to help people. I'm running out of time. I'm going to cut it off here, and I will tell you what happened in the next video.